Well, the first thing that we're going to look at is some of the different models of maternity care, some of the different ways that women can receive care. Some of these terms you might have heard of before, and some of them might be new to you. So we're going to specifically look at what we call the midwifery model of care, the obstetric, or sometimes called the medical model of care, and also talk a little bit about woman-centered, or sometimes we call it person-centered model of care as well. So I'm going to take a little pause here, or I want to get you to pause me. And before I continue, what I'd like you to do is just to grab a bit of paper, or just to type in your computer, and write down what you think each of these three different models of care mean to you. So if you were to write a list of things that you think really explain what the midwifery model of care looks like, what sort of words might you use to describe that approach to care, and then how does that differ when we're talking about obstetric or medical care, and what does woman-centered or person-centered care mean to you as well. It's not that the third one is a completely different model of care, it's more of an approach or a philosophy of care. So pause the video now and, just as I said, spend a few minutes writing down what you think the midwifery model of care is, the obstetric or medical model of care, and what woman-centered or person-centered care means to you. Okay, so how did you go with that? I'll just talk very briefly, and be interesting to see how your notes compared. So when we talk about a midwifery model of care, obviously we're talking about care that is primarily provided by midwives. And when midwives train, in their profession, essentially the way they approach pregnancy, birth, and early postpartum is that it's viewed as a normal physiological life event. And the truth is that the vast majority of women will have a normal healthy pregnancy, a normal and healthy labor and birth, and a normal and healthy postpartum. And so midwives are the experts, if you like, in normal birth. And certainly the way that they view birth, as I said, is that it is a normal life event. They don't see it necessarily as a medical event or a medical emergency, or in any kind of disease model or pathological perspective. If you like, they treat birth as normal unless proven otherwise. Obviously, there are going to be instances where women do need more specialized care, and they need that obstetric or medical intervention. And of course, some women do choose to have obstetric care from the get-go, and they will choose a private obstetrician, and they will choose to birth in a private hospital. If women are giving birth in a public hospital here in Melbourne, or indeed in any state or city across Australia, in a public facility, primarily they will be cared for throughout their pregnancy journey by midwives, unless they are deemed to be high risk, in which case, again, their care would perhaps be overseen by a by an obstetrician in the public system. So when we look at obstetric care, or the medical model of care, obviously we're talking about the primary care provider being an obstetrician, who is a specialist medical doctor, who, in addition to all of their general medical training, have gone on to study obstetrics, and often obstetrics and gynecology at a very high level of specialization. Their view, generally speaking, when thinking about pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, is quite different to that of midwives. Their training is very different, their specializations are very different, but in a nutshell, obstetricians are trained in the pathology, or the disease, if you like, of treating complications in pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. So all the things that can potentially go wrong or get complicated, that's what they specialize in. So you can understand and perhaps imagine why we do see a lot more intervention when women are cared for primarily by an obstetrician or in that obstetric or medical model. That's because that's, if you like, their default. They're trained to view pregnancy and birth as a potentially risky experience. And so they tend to be quite risk averse. Hence, again, why we see quite a lot of intervention used. And so the approach between midwives and obstetricians can be, not always, but can be quite different on that spectrum of treating birth as normal and treating birth as potentially problematic or risky. The third definition I asked you to have a think about was the woman-centered or person-centered model of care. And as I said, it's not that it's a different model of care compared to midwifery or obstetric models, and in fact should be the optimal model of care for all birthing people. Some people call it you can see from the slide, the humanistic or family-centered model of care. And that care, can often and is often provided by a known midwife, meaning that the woman knows who her midwife is and is primarily cared for her throughout the pregnancy and of course during the labor and the birth as well. Sometimes this gets called one-to-one midwifery. It can be provided in a hospital setting through something called a midwifery group practice or an MGP model. So essentially it's a know your midwife, you know your care provider. And again, when it's woman-centered care provided by a midwife, that has been shown through a lot of research done over many, many years, that this is considered to be really what we would call the gold standard of maternity care. Sadly, very, very few women actually are able to receive this type of care here in Australia, probably less than 10%. It's obviously a very intensive relationship, having the same midwife care for you throughout pregnancy and for the birth and into early postnatal. And so it's not something that hospitals can offer all the women that birth at their hospital. But it's something that, in the future, when you are working with clients, it's really helpful to be aware of where are these MGP programs or these Know Your Midwife type programs in which hospitals, and perhaps encouraging some of your clients to explore whether or not that's an option for them to take advantage of. So that's really what we're talking about with woman-centered or person-centered care. It's about really providing very specific care for that woman. It's about building a relationship of trust. It's about building a relationship where both the woman and the midwife get to really know each other. The woman feels really supported, really safe, really understood. She feels that her wishes and her intentions have been really well communicated to her care team. It is possible to provide woman-centered care through an obstetric model. It's just not as common, mainly for the reason that obstetricians traditionally spend far less time with women, both antenatally and during labor, than say midwives do. The word midwife actually means with woman, and so it's really helpful, I think, to remember that, because really that's their role. They really do see their professional role as to provide that continuous and support, not just through the birth, but that continuity of care throughout the pregnancy journey. So I hope that's helpful in distinguishing those different models of care. With anything that we cover in the course, if you have questions, you can reach out to me or Christine or Kath, by email, through the app and so forth. So we'll move on from there. Okay, now I'd like you to spend a few minutes working on a little activity. We're going to start exploring birthing options, as in different locations and as well as different models, so incorporating both of those things, so the model of care as well as the birthing location. And what I'd like you to do is to actually write a list of all the options that you are aware of for women in Melbourne. You might need to do a little bit of online research, looking at different hospitals that you're aware of in Melbourne, as well as some of the private options as well. For example, you'll see here on the slide I've mentioned home birth with a private midwife, so that is another option for women here in Melbourne. So I'd like you to write your list and then upload that on Better Impact. Okay, we're going to start talking a little bit about the importance of equity in maternity care, and specifically the doula's role as an advocate when it comes to supporting women to achieve equity in their care. So perhaps it would be a good place just to start with just talking on a really sort of basic level about sort of some definitions, because often these words get used interchangeably, but they all have slightly different meanings. Okay, so we've got here on the slide definitions for 3 words: equal, equality, and equity. So equal, as you can see, means of the same measure, the same quantity. So for example, say you are out for dinner with friends and you order a starter. There's 3 of you at the table and the starter comes and there's 6 little pieces of something. So you each get 2, right? That's equal. Everybody gets 2 pieces, right? So that's pretty simple. Equality is equal treatment. But interestingly, just because people get equal treatment, that may not result in equitable outcomes. So an example of that might be education. Every Victorian child, every Australian child is entitled to an education. But we know very well that there is a great deal of variety when it comes to the quality of education. We have public, we have private, we have independent, and even 2 children going through exactly the same school and receiving the identical same education all the way through still may not end up with an equitable outcome, meaning one child may do far better than another one, and that's because of other factors in their life outside of the school environment potentially that result in the difference in their long-term outcomes. And really that's kind of what leads me to talk about the third one, which is equity. And that's about providing all people with fair opportunities to achieve their full potential. And you'll see on the next couple of slides, a little bit more about equity. So here's a visual analogy of equity versus equality. So you've got 2 photos in this slide, 2 different races, different runners on different tracks. And if I got you to just look at them for a second and have a think about which of these 2 would be the fairer race, one where there is true equity for the runners. Okay, hopefully you've said it's the staggered race there on the left, where the runners have a staggered start, even though the person on the far left there, who's right in front of the other runners, seems to have an advantage. Of course, they have to run a slightly longer track than the person right at the back there on the far right, who is in lane 1, but that person has a shorter track to run around. So their race is equitable in that instance. Whereas the runners on the right slide, who are all at the same starting block, not necessarily running an equitable race, especially the person who's on the outside track. So hopefully visually that helps to explain the difference between equity and equality. And we've got one more example on the next slide. So here's another example of equity versus equality. And this is quite a well-known image. You might have come across this in other work that you might have done. So you've got on the left there, under the equality side of the picture, you've got 3 people who are all on the same size box, all trying to peer over and watch it looks like a baseball game. But obviously the little guy there on the right isn't really getting a fair go because they're smaller than the other two people and they can't see over the fence, even though they all have the same size box. So for this to be a truly equitable experience where everybody can see the game and enjoy it, you have to give that shorter person a little bit of literally a leg up with an extra box so that they are in an equal playing field with the others. And so that is another really good way of visually explaining the difference between equality and equity. So I hope that makes sense. Sometimes when we talk about equity or inequities, often the topic of privilege versus oppression comes up. And just to explain, again, you've got a little image here of two escalators, one going up and one going down. So if you think about it in this way, somebody who's born with privilege, and that might be somebody who's born with lots of advantages. It could be that they've been born into a family that has means. They're quite wealthy, or they grow up in a really good part of the city and they get to go to good schools. But privilege also means the color of your skin. And the reality is if you are born with white skin, you are already born with innate privilege. So what this visual of the escalator is sort of explaining is that if you imagine somebody who's born with privilege and they step on the bottom of the escalator that's going up, they actually don't need to do anything. They can just literally step onto that escalator, not even touch the handles, and they're going to just rise to the top with very little effort. Conversely, somebody who's born into oppression, so quite the opposite of privilege, somebody who is born with already a disadvantage. Again, it may be financial disadvantage, social disadvantage, and in the same way that somebody born with white skin has an innate privilege, somebody who has black or brown skin has innate oppression. And so in this visual, they're represented by somebody who is standing at the bottom of an escalator that's going down, and they need to rise to the top of the escalator by working very, very hard to essentially go up a down escalator. And if you remember maybe as a child, I think all kids try and do that at some point. They try and run up the down escalator. It's really, really hard work. And the thing is that you're going to be continually pushed down no matter how hard you try to move up. So life is exhausting and rarely fair. And so that's kind of the point that I'm trying to illustrate between privilege versus oppression.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, "I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed." And then we look and we say, "Hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone." Sympathy is, "Ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, "I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me." Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So now it's over to you, and I'd like you please to spend a little time thinking about the following questions and writing down your answers. These aren't so much right or wrong answers. These are very much reflections, and based on what we've sort of discussed and what you've watched so far, you know, what things like health equity mean to you. So the questions are, what does health equity mean to you? Who might be at higher risk of experiencing health inequity in maternity care and why? How might a doula help to facilitate equitable and respectful maternity care? And without speaking directly for your client, how can you still advocate for her? Okay. So they're just some things I'd like you to just spend a little bit of time thinking about and writing down some of your answers, your reflections. The next slide is actually a video, a really interesting, quite short video that looks at specifically the health systems and how they affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
The reason why we advocate for cultural capability in nursing and midwifery students when they're working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples is because we hear so many times, I treat everyone the same. And in actual fact, when we talk about equity and equality, we actually can't give everyone the same thing because people have started in a different place. And in the case of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Australians, you know, we had whole legislations that have stopped people from going to school. Hence, we have, you know, low education attainment. I myself am the first one from my family to actually get a university degree, and here we are. You know, well, at the time it was the 90s, I think, when I gained my first degree. But so we're behind the 8 ball. You know, so it's kind of like if you've ever seen the image of a fence and people are on different steps to see over the fence. We have to give people what they actually need to be able to achieve equity in Australia.
If you use the same inputs and treat everyone as if they're the same, you will of course guarantee an inequality of outcomes because everybody has different needs. If you have an inequality of inputs because different people's needs are being met, you're more likely to guarantee an equality of outcomes.
And that is the difference between equality and equity, or sameness and fairness, or equality and social justice.
So currently when we use the term Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health in Australia, what we really mean is fitting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people into a Western biomedical health system, as if that system is normal and as if nothing has to change about that system.
We're taking an epidemiological approach that Aboriginal health is simply another cohort. It's just another cohort, and you just try and get that cohort to get the best services from this normal, equal health system that's set up for everybody. But therein lies the reproduction of inequity. Doing that, we're actually reproducing inequity. Whereas really, if we're talking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health, we have to take a paradigmatic approach where we're saying that Aboriginal health is not just a cohort, it's actually about what Aboriginal health and Aboriginal people can teach the rest of medicine and health about good healthcare and delivery. We didn't survive here for 60,000 years because we knew nothing about medicine, or nothing about health, or nothing about the land. We have our own particular science and way of delivering healthcare that must have some value.
But the system is currently not set up to value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges, and it's certainly not set up to deliver it.
I'm Andrea Criado, the CEO of the Ishar Multicultural Women's Health Organizations. Ishar is a community-based women's healthcare organization based in Mirrabooka, which is in Perth, WA. Each year we service about 3,000 to 4,000 refugee and migrant women. Refugee and migrant women's health increasingly is becoming a point of concern because there are a number of issues, starting from the lack of awareness about how the Australian medical system works. When a woman does access the medical service, she has no idea what her rights are. She also does not know how to use the information sometimes that's provided to her. Sometimes we might provide all these the environment, an interpreter, a demonstration, etc., but have failed to actually ask the woman, do you know how to go and get the next level of help? We cannot just let a patient walk out of our service unless she has actually understood fully what's the next step that she needs to take. There are lots of issues currently existing within our systems. So firstly, there's lack of health literacy and people don't know where to go and how to go about getting the information. Secondly, once they've got the information, they often are afraid or again do not know where to go and get the next level and what the consequences of that next level of action is going to be. And the lack of appropriately used interpreters still continues across the sector, where often family members are used or no interpreter is used at all. Grassroots community-based women's health services that are accessible, flexible, culturally safe, allow women from refugee backgrounds in particular to come in and get information, because if once they get the information in a manner in which they understand, it helps to prevent long-term health, serious health outcomes. So generally we find that women don't come into us for a women's health service. They come in seeking support and help for other things, like how to fill in a form to get a pension from Centrelink. In the course of that conversation, they find out that they could actually see a doctor who is a female doctor, who's bulk billing, who uses an interpreter, and often childcare is provided while they see the doctor. So these are very important factors for refugee and migrant women for their health needs. So the role that women's health organizations do play is integral to connecting women to health services, both in the primary healthcare space and often to avoid them reaching the tertiary healthcare services like hospitals. Health organizations offer the use of interpreters, but often the client or the patient does not understand the meaning of those words, even if it's interpreted into their language, because health literacy often is very low, even from the country of origin. And in many countries, the language, the jargon that is used or the terminology has not yet been developed, especially in the mental health care space and also in women's health. Communication can occur if a woman feels culturally safe, does not feel judged, does not think that she is going to be denied access to a service, or her rights are going to be denied, or her religious beliefs are going to be ridiculed. So accessibility, being able to go into the client's frame of reference, making the information understandable in the manner that the client can understand, and providing a culturally safe environment. These are the 4 aspects really important in communicating health information.
On this slide, I've listed some different points that I think really sum up the role of the doula and the philosophy of doula support. And I'm just going to read through them, but what I would really like you to do after this is for you to have a think about what your personal philosophy of support as a doula is. And what I'd like you to do is actually put that down in sort of a journal format and upload that right now at the beginning of the course, in the 2nd week. And it's something we'll revisit at the end of the course, and I think will be really interesting just to see if your philosophy of support now changes in any way as you get towards the end of your training. So here, as I said, are just some components of the doula's philosophy of support. Women have an innate ability to give birth. Birth is transformative in the life of a family. Women's confidence and ability to give birth is either enhanced or diminished by the care provider and place of birth. Women have the right to respectful care and continuous support. Women have the right to give birth free from routine medical interventions. Birth can safely take place in homes, birth centres, and hospitals. Evidence-based care helps improve birth outcomes. As a doula, our role is to support you informationally, offering knowledge, research, dialogue, and whatever else is necessary to help you make informed decisions throughout your pregnancy and birth. The International Childbirth Initiative, or ICI, is an organization, an international organization made up of a number of organizations and other stakeholders, obviously organizations committed to supporting safe and healthy birth, respectful care in childbirth, and quite recently updated a really important document called 12 Steps to Safe and Respectful Mother-Baby Family Maternity Care. It's a bit of a mouthful. The ICI, you can hopefully click on the link there and have a look at the work that they do. It was developed, as you can see at the bottom of the slide here, as a collaborative response to a call from women, their partners, and healthcare providers all over the world for optimal maternity care that recognises safe and respectful childbirth as a basic human right in any setting and in any circumstance. You'll see on the next slide, you can just have a quick read through what the 12 steps are, so have a look at that. But as I said, have a look at the ICI website. You can actually download that document, but there's lots of really good information and resources there, obviously all related to respectful care and equitable care in maternity. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, this is the summary version of the ICI's 12 steps to safe and respectful mother-baby family maternity care. So have a look at that. And I just wanted to quickly introduce the next video, actually the last video for this week's session. It is hosted by a woman called Penny Simkin, who some of you might have come across. Penny Simkin is a really renowned birth educator, doula trainer, and somebody who is widely considered to really have played a key role in the development of the sort of modern doula movement, if you like. She's one of the founding members of DONA International, DONA, D-O-N-A, stands for Doulas of North America, but although it started in the US, has spread all across the world. There are donor doulas practicing literally everywhere. So Penny was one of the founding members, as I said, of DONA. She's a really prolific writer. She's written some fantastic books, including Pregnancy, Childbirth, and the Newborn, The Birth Partner, which is a great book for doulas, as well as, you know, just birth support people in general. And she has a really great website as well. So if you just sort of Google Penny Simkin, S-I-M-K-I-N, you'll find her work. She has some great YouTube videos as well on her YouTube channel. And she's very, very generous with the materials that she provides and things that you can download for free. So have a look at Penny Simkin's website, her videos. The video that you're going to watch in just a minute is really beautiful. It's called A Day You'll Never Forget. And Penny talks about the importance of birth memories and why giving birth and how you give birth is so, so important in terms of the lifelong memories that it will leave. So I hope you enjoy that video. And then the very final slide will just be some summary of sort of resources and little assignments to do for this week. Okay.
Hi everyone. I'd like to talk with you today about a lesson I learned years ago about the memories of birth that women hold. And I'll tell you, I learned this from a study that I did really 20 years after I started teaching. I was having some thoughts about leaving the field, and I decided I would try to find some of the women that I had taught in my original classes. And I have to tell you, I've been teaching since 1968. So I was able to find, this was in the late 80s, I was able to find some women who had been in my classes and whose stories, the birth stories I had, they wrote them and sent them to me shortly after their babies were born. And so I contacted these folks, and I found 24 women. All the women I found agreed to participate in my study. And then they wrote another story. I asked them, will you write the story as you remember it now? And that was about 20 years after I started teaching, after they had had their babies. Well, I compared the two stories, and it was uncanny how similar those two were. And the second ones were shorter, but the memories were very consistent. Well, then I had them come in, and I did a study, I interviewed them and asked them some questions about how satisfied they felt and other things. And the things I found were not that the women who had the highest satisfaction had the best births in terms of easy births or quick births or natural births. That was not a factor in their satisfaction. The most important single factor was how they remembered being cared for by their doctors or nurses. We had no midwives even practicing in our area at that time. But the women who felt that they were honored, they were respected, they were listened to, they were helped, they were nurtured, they were the ones that later felt, 20 years later, felt satisfied. Some of them had very difficult births. Some had very easy births. But some of the women who were not satisfied with their births had easy births, but they remembered being insulted or treated badly, not listened to. One woman was told, stop that breathing right now, I won't have it. They felt very discounted. So that makes a long story short, but my lesson from that was, number one, women remember their births forever, and you're going to, so let's make it a positive memory. But also, the care you receive during childbirth is going to be key in how you remember it for years to come. And this was, I have to tell you, this was the study that for me, that convinced me that we needed to provide better care for women, emotional care for women during labor. And I had a lot to do with beginning the doula movement. And I saw doulas as an answer there. But the point, that's one point I want to make, but the other point I want to make is that it's worth it to spend a little time thinking about what's important to you, about the people to have around you that will provide nurturing, love, safety, and the kinds of things you want from your birth. Does it matter to you to have a natural birth? Does it matter to you to have medication so that you won't have to feel all of it? Does it matter who is with you? If the nurse is unpleasant to you, does that matter? If it does, are you going to speak up about it? But my point is that you are creating a memory, and you have a lot to do with that. And the people that are surrounding you and the care that you're receiving is going to make a huge difference for the rest of your life in how you look back on this. One woman said, "After that, I knew I could do anything." She was so empowered by the birth, and that carried on forever. Another woman said, "It was like climbing Mount Everest with a companion." Another woman said, "I could joke with my doctor." That doesn't happen too often now because we don't get to know our care providers all that well. But I could give you lots of stories of what the women said years later. But my point, I just want you to think about how you'd like to remember this, and knowing that there are things you can do to ensure a good memory. Thank you.